Going to wait for him to come out?
Yeah.
It'll close for another hour or so. And it's raining pretty hard.
Yeah, that's right, it is, isn't it? You know, it just happened. I got a bottle of pretty good rye in my pocket. I'd a lot rather get wet in here.
Well, looks like we're closed for the rest of the afternoon.
This is the Metafilm List Podcast with your hosts, Corey and Mike. We explore new and old films, indie, foreign, big and small. We're here to debate, discuss, explore all aspects of film and film culture. In today's episode, we'll be talking about the pre-code gangster classic Scarface, also known as Scarface, Shame of the Nation, from 1932, starring Paul Mooney. And we'll also be talking about Big Sleep, starring Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, the classic film noir detective story based on the Raymond Chandler novel from 1939. So, a little bit of background to Scarface. Howard Hawks made his first sound film in 1930 called Dawn Patrol, a World War I airplane movie, which I watched this year and I thought it was amazing. It almost feels like it was filmed during World War I. Cool. The reason why I haven't written a review about it or haven't talked about it because I actually want to watch the remake that was made a few years later, which reuses all the action footage that Howard Hawks filmed. They built World War I style airplanes in 1930 and filmed with the camera mounted on the hood of the airplane. So in 1938, they made a higher budget version with known actors and better quality filming of the scenes on the ground, but they reused all the action scenes. And from what I hear, the remake is also pretty good. Dawn Patrol has an 8.0, and it's on the Metafilm List, whereas Dawn Patrol, the remake, 1938, has a 7.7. And that warrants high enough for me to be curious enough to watch both versions, and I've had the other one, the 38 version, and I've been meaning to watch it. But anyway, the reason why I bring up Dawn Patrol, it's the place you would start to watch a Howard Hawks filmography, is that at the same time Howard Hughes made Hell's Angels. Now, if you've seen The Aviator with Leonardo DiCaprio, the whole opening scene is Howard Hughes making this movie Hell's Angels. He made the entire thing as a silent movie, and then sound hit, and he just suddenly realized that he has to remake the entire movie with sound.
Oh, wow.
And what he didn't know was that Howard Hawks was also making pretty much a similar film about World War I pilots. So they had a lawsuit against each other. They tried to work things out, and basically, from what is known about the myth of the situation, is Howard Hughes invited Howard Hawks to sort things out through a game of golf. And by the time the golf match was over, the lawsuit was dropped, Dawn Patrol was released, and a few months later, Hell's Angels were released. Both of them were commercially successful, and both of them didn't necessarily tread on each other's territory. But
and that's how you solve a dispute over a game of golf.
Which brings us to Scarface, The Shame of a Nation, produced by Howard Hughes, directed by Howard Hawks.
So they probably came up with this movie over the golf game at the same time as trying to come up with the dispute for their other two films.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
That's how you solve the movie fights back in the 30s. So Howard Hughes said that he wanted to produce Howard Hawks in his next film. And Howard Hughes didn't really direct many films after his first big movie, Hell's Angels. He became more of a producer than anything else. So for those of you who've seen Aviator, Scarface is mentioned in passing when he's sitting in front of the censorship board, and then him just being like, him apologizing in The Aviator, saying, I haven't seen you guys since that Scarface incident, as he's talking about some other film. And that's the mention of Scarface in passing. So now, why is Scarface, why did I give it as homework? Well, because this is a film that promotes wrongdoing and behaving badly, and it's almost promoted as being a good thing.
Not only that, but it's one of the first movies that I think I've ever watched that had a disclaimer at the front of it saying, we as a nation, we despise the goings-ons of, organized crime and stuff like that. And then the entire movie kind of glorifies it.
Yeah.
The character of Tony was so cool, and smooth. Like he just walked in and you knew some cool stuff was going to happen, like right up until the end.
Yeah, Paul Mooney, the guy who played Tony in the film, he really commanded every scene that he was in. He was so good, and he was able to pull off the same thing that Al Pacino pulled off in the Brian De Palma remake in '83. Is he walks into a room and you don't know whether to be impressed or to be scared at the same time. And he has a bunch of guys behind him, one of them flipping a coin and the other one kind of chewing on something.
Yeah.
And you don't know whether or not he's going to come in. And then he comes in and he's your friend, and you see the guy relax and takes things easy, but it could very easily, the scene could switch around and, and the other guys could pull out Tommy guns and just start killing people. What makes this movie interesting is not just the violence and the acting, was that it falls into a very special period, which I mentioned briefly in our last episode, but there's pre-Hays Code is what it's called. In 1934, they put into practice the Motion Picture Association censorship, which lasted until the 60s. So between the end of silent films in 27-28 and 1934, there's this small period where sound films were just being created but did not have proper rating systems. So directors had this weird creativity and freedom
that no one else had,
that you did not have until pretty much the 70s, which is why you got suddenly films like Alien and
Dog Day Afternoon
and The Shining suddenly explode out of the late 70s, early 80s, because the ban was lifted and suddenly you had modern creativity. The modern world started when the Hays Code was lifted.
It's almost like you can make movies like they made back in like 32 again.
Yeah, but the thing is, the world had changed so much that the Hays Code changed into something else, that changed into something else, changed into something else. But the real censorship really came about, like lifted, I think it was in the 66? Yeah, it was in 66.
But you're saying all this stuff about, 32 not having the rating system, but then 2 years later this rating system coming into effect. But as I didn't see anything wrong. Obviously, it's 2015, but I'm sitting down watching this movie from 1932. I think it's great, but there's nothing wrong with it. There's nothing in it that I deem bad. I've seen worse.
Mm-hmm.
But the things that they portray in the film were great. The bombings of the buildings, them walking into places and shooting things up. The great scene where you see the silhouettes lined up in front as the camera pans down, and you just hear them all talking, and he's like, yeah, just wait there for a second, and then you hear the Tommy gun go off, and then all the shadows just drop. I've seen much worse. Like, what was so bad about 32 as opposed to a movie out today?
Well, that's the thing, is there isn't any difference anymore. But what the point was is that there, between around 29 and 33, there was this little period where they made movies then the way they make movies now. That's the point, is that this early 30s little pre-code era is they had the freedom to show you the kind of stuff that they can do today, but they couldn't do anything in between. Between 34 and the late 60s, there was this huge list of things that you couldn't do. You could, like, Psycho is very famous as being the first film with a flushing toilet. The MPA, the Motion Picture Association of America, they had control over censorship.
So they just came out and decided we don't want these in this. We don't want these things in the movie.
Yeah.
Was there something that caused it? Was it just the overall nature of the movies being produced back in that time that they're like, okay, we can't do this or else there will be civil unrest?
Yes. The general principles are, I have loaded up here, no picture shall be produced that will lower the morale standards of those who see it. The sympathy of the audience should never be thrown to the side of crime, wrongdoing, evil, or sin. Basically,
good is good, as bad is bad.
Good is good.
You don't sympathize with the anti-hero, which is what I see Tony as.
Yes. So, okay. Illegal drug trafficking must never be presented. Methods of smuggling should not be presented. Use of firearms should be restricted to only essentials. That's where you get the good guy can only shoot the bad guy when the bad guy pulls a gun. That's where that comes from.
Whereas in Scarface in 32, he just walks in and shoots a guy and then walks out.
That's right. So you still see it in modern day films.
How did people make it through that dark period of time with movies? Like, is that why everything I've seen is like so happy and joyful or easygoing?
Yeah, that's why everything from pretty much 34 till like 68 has this kind of cheesy like charm to it. If you think of Mary Poppins, everything has this kind of cheesy overtone to it. Even looking at Ben-Hur and Cleopatra and other films that take place throughout the 60s, there's still this kind of holier-than-thou aspect to the way people talk. Movies were idolized as being kind of how one should behave. It was very Christian-centric or very
moral tales.
Very moral tales. So that's where you get some of the structures of modern day cinema of like the good guy has to kill the bad guy at the end. And if the bad guy gets away or the bad guy wins, there's something wrong with the film.
Imagine if they had still kept all that rating system in now. It'd be horrible.
Brutal killings are not to be presented in detail.
What's the fun in that?
The use of liquor in American life, while not required by plot or for proper characterization, will not be shown. You can't show people getting trashed.
What about The Lost Weekend? Our main protagonist in The Lost Weekend was
very
drunk the entire movie.
But it was shown as being bad.
It really was. It was a very good cautionary
I think
tale.
that's why...
Okay, so a loophole. Now we're talking loopholes.
Yeah, basically throughout this period, everyone was pushing the boundaries. Where you hear about what Alfred Hitchcock had to do in order to get away with some of the stuff that he got away with in Psycho, he pushed the loopholes as hard as he possibly could. Let's see here. It's seduction or rape.
Oh, that's just
There
bad
are
anyway.
never proper subjects for comedy. Scenes of actual childbirth are never presented. Sex perversion or inference is forbidden. Basically, no vulgarity, no obscenity, no profanity, no indecency, no sexualized dancing, limitation of what religious ceremonies are allowed to demonstrate. Treatment of bedrooms must be governed with good taste and decency. So that's where going back to our previous episode, when it comes to that's where you get sexy thrillers. You get sexy thrillers because suddenly you can do sexy thrillers.
Yeah, and it becomes more of a plot point than it actually does sexy and stuff. You know, it's all about the seduction. It's all about the guy seducing them, like the man seducing the woman or the woman seducing the man to get them to do what they want. It really does play an integral part in many films in cinema.
Yeah. So understanding that there was this thing called the Hays Code, when we move into even talking about Big Sleep, you can see the shift in who's allowed to kill who and why.
Yeah, but even in the Big Sleep, they get away with loopholing some of the laws. Like the scene in the Big Sleep where he walks into the bookstore, the second bookstore, and he starts talking with the woman there. He's clearly asking her the right questions, and then it's nothing but seduction tactic. And not only that, but it's implied.
It's not, though.
It's not. It's really up to the watcher on whether or not he slept with her for that hour that he was waiting for the other bookstore to close. And the way that I watched it is like, yeah, he totally slept with her. Like, she let her hair down, and he looks at her, and he's like, oh,
that's where you get the James Bond stuff as well. In the early James Bond films, where he hits on the girl and then they cut away, and then later they cut back, and you're meant to assume that they slept together.
The best thing about a lot of these older films is the dialogue. The dialogue is smart. It's witty. Everything that came out of Humphrey Bogart's mouth in The Big Sleep was
Don't
just
jump ahead.
on
Don't jump
key.
ahead. Don't jump ahead. Let's focus on Scarface here. Let's focus on Scarface. We'll get to Big Sleep. But it comes down to what were they allowed to do, what were they not allowed to do. And the thing about Scarface is not just the violence. It was setting up this anti-hero concept and playing it in such a way that this was, though it took place basically, it was a movie made in 1932 about a situation that was going on in the mid-20s. So it was very relevant, very real. They knew exactly what they were talking about. So what you were seeing was the movie-sized version of the Prohibition in a way that if we do it today ends up looking... How do you describe Miller's Crossing and Road to Perdition and The Untouchables and other films that takes place? There's a certain movie veneer that crosses over all these films to make them look almost period pieces or cheesy by the fact that they got these old cars and look at all the costumes. Look how great everybody looks.
Listen how they talk.
Listen to how they talk. But there's this still kind of this moviness that comes to all the films made about the Prohibition era from modern day that has this kind of...
as opposed to a movie that was made right after or during the Prohibition?
Right.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
This is where Dawn Patrol hits true to what World War I pilots were like, because it was filmed in 1930 about something that was going on in 1915, which is where the movie takes place. So just 15 years have passed.
Yeah,
this is where Platoon hits hard on what Vietnam was like, because it was filmed a few years after with people there being able to tell stories and put that movie together. Whereas if you make a movie today about Vietnam, it loses that sense of authenticity. It becomes movie magic in the same way as you make some of these Prohibition films. The films are great. Untouchables is a great movie, but it still has this...
It's the cheesy sense. It's that level of cheese that you add to it because you no longer really have any relevance to the time period.
Yeah, you're making it all up.
Well, you're making some of it up. You're using the period, but making up everything else that's around it.
But even if we're going to be going Untouchables versus Scarface, it has to do with the fact of look at the way people dress in Untouchables. Look at the way people dressed in Scarface. Yes, it's kind of the same, but you can feel that in Scarface it's real. Same thing if we jump ahead to Big Sleep, you see the way people dress, and then if you see another film that takes from today and they just put people in the 40s to make them dress like that, there's a sense of silliness, the Dick Tracy kind of silliness that goes along with it that makes makes people look kind of like caricatures of what it is they're trying to portray. And that's where the authenticity comes in with watching a movie like Scarface, because it takes place, they know what it is they're talking about, they can get those outfits. They can make those outfits. They can.
Well, they still wear those outfits.
Yeah, they still wear those outfits. And I think that's what makes some of these early 30s films so interesting, is because the Second World War hasn't happened yet. The First World War is over, and they're doing either commentary on what the First World War or what happened after the First World War, the Prohibition or the Depression. And this movie was a world where the cops are corrupt. People are corrupt, the whole society is corrupt, and you have a group of mobsters who take advantage of the situation and become super wealthy and take it and have fun.
I like that about Scarface too. You know, they didn't you know, they showed you what it was for. You know, they didn't, you know, cover it up or, you know, play all fancy with it or anything. This is a real problem. This is going down. This is how it plays out.
Social commentary.
Very good social commentary.
Oh, another film that comes to mind is Public Enemies with Johnny Depp. Again, playing the Don Dillinger character. Again, in the same period, made in modern day, but has this kind of, again, they're trying to make it look cool, but in a movie way.
Well, the other thing, too, is that you have the addition of color, too, so everything's brighter. The other thing about Scarface being in black and white is that it adds that sense of dread and dreary darkness that was going on at that time.
Mm-hmm.
It almost mirrored corruption perfectly.
Yeah.
Whereas if you watch something like The Untouchables today, you've got that color. You've got it just adds color to everything.
Yeah, it's almost like the 1930s should be in black and white, because that's where all the things belong. And then when you watch something in color of the 1930s, it seems off.
It's interesting because I had this thought while watching, and it's like, okay, if I went back in time, would it all be in black and white? Because that would be pretty sweet. I love the use of the X throughout the entire movie.
Okay, elaborate. What do you mean?
Like, anytime something bad happened or something bad was going to happen, there would be an X on the screen. Whether it be his scar on his face, a pan up to a road sign where the road signs were crossed, but it made the X. The scene that I had previously talked about him, like the camera panning down and you see the shadows in the line before he mows them down with the Tommy gun.
Mm-hmm.
The X in the lattice, you know,
that's right.
Anytime he was doing something like horrific, an X would be prominent on the screen somehow.
Ah, okay.
Which was really cool. And I'm glad I picked that up right away, because then it kind of alluded to everything.
Mm-hmm.
as I was watching the film. The effects they used in the movie were great too, like when they would bomb something or shoot up a place.
It looked real though.
It did. A lot of it felt real, and I'm going to mention this, but the only laughable part was when they tossed the guy out of the car.
Yeah, fair enough.
I giggled a little, but at the same time, it didn't take away from my overall enjoyment of the film because, I understood what was happening and what was going on. I liked the relationship that he had with his sister to the point in the end where it was him and his sister that he would try to protect throughout the entire film. Like, don't do this, don't be like me, ended up like him, and they ended up going down in, the blaze of glory.
Yeah. There's no real, spoilers here because the 83 De Palma version with Al Pacino is the same movie.
Yeah, just with lots of drugs.
Yeah. Well, they modernized it.
Ah, yeah.
That's the thing, is that...
And I'm looking forward to watching it again.
One of the things that makes this movie interesting, it's about immigration in the same kind of sense, but in a different point of view, is back in the 30s, they were focusing on immigration. Who were the big immigrants in the 1930s? They were focusing on the Italians. Now, I recommended you watch this movie with subtitles because I watched this movie with subtitles, not because the sound was bad, was because they were doing Italian immigrants speaking in 1930s street slang with using dialogue of the 1930s. And I haven't needed subtitles for these kind of films before, but I needed it for this because it was hard to follow sometimes what it is they were talking about.
It really was.
But that made it even more authentic and more cool.
It was. Like I'm glad I watched it with the subtitles.
Yeah, me too.
Because there's a lot of scenes where Tony's going off and he's talking, and a lot of it you can make out, but then sometimes it's almost like an inaudible mumble, and a lot of it happens like when he gets really frustrated, really angry. He really has a tendency to muffle his words as when he acts. But once again, the subtitles help with that, and it did. It added more realism to
these characters. Yeah, and I think back in the day they were smuggling booze because that's what you did during the Prohibition, and then when you wanted to modernize it into the 80s, well, you can't be smuggling booze. That doesn't make any sense anymore. So what do? You upgrade it to cocaine, and suddenly it becomes, when you look at the 80s and you look at today, it's still as relevant today as it was in the 80s. So when you're talking about the Al Pacino movie, that's why people idolize it, because it's about people fighting the system and becoming super big. And
why can't we have what we want when we want it?
Yeah,
we're free. You say it's a land of opportunity. This is the opportunity. I want to take it, but then you're going to shut me down because of it.
Which is the theme back in the 32.
Yeah, it was exactly
as much as it is in the 80s.
Yeah. So the message is the same.
And the blaze of glory in the end is also the same.
Oh, the blaze of glory. One of the cool things that I liked about Scarface 32 was when he's showing off his apartment and he's like, look at these, I've got these metal shutters so they can't get me. And he's like so proud of it. Like,
so how would you, from what your memory is of, I know you're going to rewatch it, but from what I remember, Scarface, the 83 version, is an excellent remake.
It is an excellent remake. Right down to where he's like, this is the view that I have, and then he looks up and there's like in 32 where he looks up and there's the sign of the earth and it says, the world is yours. That plays perfectly to the 83 version where he had that big statue in his entryway of the revolving earth and it says the world is yours. Oh.
Yeah, well, it's clear that Brian De Palma did not just make it up as well. Yeah. He watched the movie and remade it.
As soon as I saw that, I'm like, yeah. So
Scarface, Shame of a Nation made it to the list because of all the other Howard Hawks films that made the list.
Okay.
So in the end, you like Scarface. What would you give it? This is the oldest film you've ever seen, I think.
It is the oldest film I've ever seen, and I would give it an 8.
Yeah. So would I. It's a great movie. It's solid in what it is that it's trying to do. The special effects are amazing.
It kept my attention. The acting was phenomenal. Everything was steeped in realism for the time, and that's one of the things that I realized while watching it. The acting was great. It was a good, solid movie, and it held my interest through the whole thing.
Yeah. Paul Mooney, the guy who played Tony in it, he is in two other films on the Metafilm list. One is I'm a Fugitive from a Chain Gang, which is also a film noir. It's about escaping from prison. It's kind of like Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? There's a kind of connection with those two films because they take place almost in the same period, have similar themes. And The Life of Emile Zola, which is the film he won Best Actor for, and it won Best Picture in 1937. So Paul Mooney does make a couple of more appearances in the Metafilm list, and maybe in our discussions. So he's not an actor that just kind of made it and then disappeared, but he shows up again a few more times.
Same about the actor we're going to talk about next.
The reason why this movie made the list was because Howard Hawks has 5 movies on the Metafilm list: Dawn Patrol, Bringing Up Baby, His Girl Friday, To Have and Have Not, The Big Sleep, and Rio Bravo. So sorry, that's 6 films on the Metafilm list. So
A lot of those are with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall.
That's right. He made To Have and Have Not with Humphrey Bogart and Lauren Bacall, and then they brought them together in The Big Sleep. That's why if you saw the trailer, it says "Together Again" in big letters.
Well, they got married after The Big Sleep.
Yeah, and they actually played again together in many other films in the future.
Yeah, I think they were in a movie before The Big Sleep. Then they did The Big Sleep. They got together, and then they were married.
Yeah.
And then they acted in a bunch of other films together.
So Howard Hawks has 6 films that made the Metafilm list, and by respect, he gets 5 more. Films that have 7.8 and 7.9. So because of that, he gets a total of 11 films. So Dawn Patrol is his first film. Scarface is his second film. And then you have films like Bringing Up Baby and His Girl Friday. Bringing Up Baby and His Girl Friday are Cary Grant films, which are on the top 250. They're some of the best romantic comedies ever made. And I've seen Bringing Up Baby, and it's one of the funniest, most awesome romantic comedies I've ever seen. I have not seen His Girl Friday yet, and I'm looking forward to it. But yeah, he moved on from action films into romantic comedies, and then back onto action films doing Sergeant York, which is a World War I action film, and then back onto kind of romance thrillers, and eventually onto westerns. His last 2 films on the list, Rio Bravo and Red River, are John Wayne western films.
Cool.
So Howard Hawks is unquestionably one of the best directors in the history of cinema, and has clearly a wide range of different films that he has looked at. So all his films are now legendary, and all these films are now legendary. And basically what we just did was we skipped from Scarface and we jumped ahead to Big Sleep, just because we had a conversation of what is the film that has the monologue. Now, I thought it was The Big Sleep, and doing a little bit of research, it is The Big Sleep, but not the movie, but the trailer. The trailer has him going into the bookstore that you mentioned earlier, asking somebody, do you have the new Chamberlain book? And like, oh, you mean The Big Sleep? And then he opens it up and starts reading it, and his monologue is the almost original movie voiceover trailer dude idea of him.
That's cool.
Of him reading the book, and they show you bits of the movie, and that's where you get the inner monologue idea come about, which so many other films after that started to do. So where you see that idea of the guy walking down the street and you hear the inner monologue like a book, it comes from the trailer from Big Sleep. So even though in Big Sleep you don't actually have that, I was mistaken when we were talking about it.
Oh, that's okay.
But that's where the original idea comes from. So not necessarily in the film, but sort of connected to the film.
I'm sure there's other film noirs out there that actually imply the voiceover in the film itself.
They do, but they were made after, I think, Big Sleep, or they're less famous than Big Sleep. We're moving on to Humphrey Bogart. So this is your first Bogart film.
It is.
What did you think of just Bogey?
Very smooth.
Was he cool?
He was.
Can you understand why he was this mega sex icon?
Every girl in this movie wanted to sleep with him.
Yes. Even though they openly said so.
Even the taxi driver. The taxi driver was a small point in the movie. He just hopped into the cab, said, follow that cab, and whatever he said between the time he got in that cab to the time he got out, she was like, Kira, call me, preferably at night when I don't work, the way he talks. Like, he also comes off as a bit of also arrogant, the way he talks to these people, but everybody wants him.
Yeah.
Like, he shuts down some of these women, and, like, especially, like, Lauren Bacall and the girl that plays her sister.
Mm-hmm.
He's constantly, like, he's real mean to them.
Yeah.
But they're all, like, fawning over him.
Yeah.
You know, to the point, like, at the scene where he's, like, all tied up and everything, and she's like, you shouldn't have got yourself into this mess. And he talks to her for a little bit, and he's like, how about you let me out of here? And she's all like, oh, yeah, okay, I'll do it. You know, and helps him escape.
Well, that's a combination of both the character that they're trying to produce, this cool, suave, knows what he's doing character.
Oh, he knows what he's doing.
But it's a combination of both the character as well as Humphrey Bogart himself, because Humphrey Bogart made it big with Maltese Falcon back in 41, and then he did Casablanca in 42, and then To Have and Have Not in 44, and by that point in time he was just so big. He was, you can call him the George Clooney of the day, but you can't compare him almost to anybody. He was so big after those films that he really struggled to do Big Sleep, because he was trying to do something different than he did. And if you watch Casablanca and Maltese Falcon, it is different. He plays a different character. All of them cool, but cool in different ways.
In this one, he was the way that I perceived him as cool is that he was intelligent. Like, he was very intelligent. Like, he knew what was going on. He knew what he had to do. And then it was the words he used and the way that he talked to people. Mm-hmm. That itself, like, just people just eating out of his hands. The way he could convince people just to do something. Mm-hmm. I like the scene, too, where he walked into the first bookstore and he puts the hat on, he tips it down a bit, he puts the glasses on, and he starts to act like a completely different person. That was a cool scene.
Bogart can act?
Yeah. I want to, like, after this, I'm like, what other Bogart movies can I watch? I should probably watch them all.
I've seen a few of them, but he has 12 films on the Metafilm list, and another few that should be, but don't have the scores to make it on their own. So there's already 12 films in and of itself that Bogart holds up.
For all intents and purposes, I should watch Casablanca.
Yeah, we'll get to Casablanca, but before Casablanca, there's Maltese Falcon. And Maltese Falcon is the film that made Humphrey Bogart huge.
That's a film noir, isn't it?
Yes, it is. We're still on the film noir. He's the detective. They're both Raymond Chandler books made into films, both starring Humphrey Bogart.
I know of these movies. I know of the Maltese Falcon. I know of Casablanca because I've seen them parodied. How do I know these movies without ever watching them?
Because they're so big and so famous.
Yeah, like without even watching them.
There are two films, Angels with Dirty Faces and Roaring Twenties, both films that fit with the Scarface concept. They're both about prohibition, and they're both about guys becoming criminals.
Yeah, I like that.
Those three films are the three films I've seen, and they all worked with one another, of Angels with Dirty Faces and Roaring Twenties. In both those films, Humphrey Bogart plays a secondary role, a side character, a supporting actor. And Maltese Falcon is his first film on the list that he is the central actor in it.
Okay.
And even Maltese Falcon is a remake of a previous version of Maltese Falcon. No one anticipated when they were making it as how big it was going to be and how big of a star Humphrey Bogart was about to become.
He became huge.
Both Roaring Twenties and Angels with Dirty Faces starred James Cagney, who became huge in many other films. So James Cagney and Humphrey Bogart, Michael Curtis, the director, and John Hudson, these four guys interswapped directing, acting relationships.
Oh, so each person had a crack at the other actor, and each actor had a crack at the other director.
Yeah, basically Michael Curtis did a James Cagney movie with Humphrey Bogart, and then Michael Curtis did a Humphrey Bogart film afterwards. He did Casablanca. And John Hudson, he's done 4 Humphrey Bogart films. No James Cagney films. And James Cagney did the first 2 films that I mentioned with Humphrey Bogart. There's a relationship there between these actors and these directors and which films they would be in, and their careers are tied in with one another. So Maltese Falcon had an original version in 31, I believe, or 32. And that movie was remade in 41 with Humphrey Bogart, and it became this huge thing. Then Humphrey Bogart became this huge actor and went on to make The Big Sleep. So a brief introduction to Big Sleep. Big Sleep is a detective is hired to figure out who's blackmailing this rich man.
Yeah.
That's the basis of it. The rich man has 2 daughters, and he starts kind of peeling back the layers of who's doing what to whom. What makes this movie at least amazing to me is that whereas other films, modern films, when it comes to trying to do the same kind of thing, it becomes kind of, they try to pull out twists later in the film. There's no twists in this film. He's just unraveling more and more and more of what's going on. By the end of the film, there's no like surprises. It just has to do with the fact that it's just really complicated.
How far does this go?
Yeah, how far does this go? And at some point,
and by the end of it, you do get your answers.
You do. And the idea is that he even gets an opportunity to walk away, and he doesn't, because he wants to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
So he keeps peeling back the layers of this plot between the various different characters to get into the most convoluted, complex, confusing whodunit probably ever committed to film, and it's non-stop dialogue. It's just go, 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 go from the whole thing, and they tried to ram as much as they possibly could into the 2 hours that they had to work with.
You know, like it goes from blackmail to sports debts to a photograph to drugs. To, oh my God, it's just,
and then murder,
and then people start getting murdered, and then he's like other people get murdered, and
there's a love story in there too.
Yeah, there's a love story, but it was the rest of the movie that was just, my head was like, yeah. By the end of it, I was just like,
yeah. I started watching the film just kind of like, okay, I can see where this is going. All right, and then halfway through the film, just like, whoa, what's going on? There's this and that and that, and there's so many different things happening all on top of each other. And the thing is, as it is confusing because of how much is being rammed down the audience's throat, but it makes sense, and you come out of the film not necessarily like it all makes sense in the end in a whodunit and why they do it, and I found that in the end, when you look back at the film, you realized how masterfully it was put together in order to make sure that every plot and every element was revealed at the right moment to not only keep the confusion, but make you want more and make you want to know where this is going, how is this going to turn out.
But the other thing, too, is from what I understand, too, is that it didn't hand you the explanation at the end of the movie. You know, they ended the movie the way they did, hoping that you, as the audience, had followed along and got it at the end.
Mm-hmm.
Unlike some movies that give you, like, the entire plot outline, it's like, okay, this is how it happened in a simpler form, and you're all like, oh, okay. This did not do that.
No.
This did not hold your hand.
No.
Stuff started happening. Stuff kept happening and piled.
Yeah, and piled on top of each other.
Until the end where he was like, okay, this is the last layer.
I have to admit, I started watching the movie with this kind of relaxed kind of, okay, let's see what this movie is all about. And by the end of the film, I was fully engaged in the movie, trying to figure out what is going on, who is doing what to who, and so on and so forth. So it's film noir at its absolute peak of what this concept is called. It's intrigue, it's the femme fatale, it's the murder, it's the blackmail, it's the corruption, it's the
love story.
It's the love story, it's the red herrings trying to get you confused on what is this going on. It's the everyday normal guy trying to help out the woman. It's a combination of all these things happening at once, and it's amazing. Absolutely amazing that they were able to pull off such witty dialogue, such a incredibly confusing and complex plot, and just have it at the end where you just take a step back and go, okay, I think I get it.
The other thing that I'm trying to understand about the movie is, and I don't know how it played in, and I really want to sit down and I want to watch it again.
Yeah, I actually want to watch it again myself.
But it's Humphrey Bogart pulling at his ear throughout the movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's the younger sister biting her thumb.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way the shake in the older sister's hand. It's all the small subtleties of the characters within the movie that, like, what is it? And I think it has something to do, like, I haven't really placed it. That's why I want to watch it again. But I think every time every time Bogart's character is putting the pieces together, he's touching his ear.
Mm-hmm.
You know, as he's putting the pieces together.
Mm-hmm.
I think the younger sister is every time she's lying or she gets deeper into a lie, she does the thumb bite.
People have tells. I think that's the point.
And that's why I want to watch it again, because I've never seen it played out like that before. Like, I'm watching it and I'm like, okay, at first it was bothering me, but then I was like, there's a reason why he's doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's the same thing with the other characters. It's like, okay, there's a reason why they're doing it. There's a reason why it's in your face.
There's clearly a lot to be revisited watching this movie. I came out of this movie with the exact same feeling as I want to watch this movie again, not only to try to follow and figure out how they pieced it together, but there's so many subtleties.
It's the backgrounds too. The backgrounds play a part in it. Like, anything that's going on the screen is an integral part to the story. Like, I'm sure you could probably tell what's going on halfway through the movie just by watching the way they act.
And the thing is that really makes the movie great is that when Raymond Chandler wrote the book and people started asking him questions about the book, for example, I'll throw this out as a spoiler, the driver who gets thrown off the bridge, the question is, who killed him? And even Raymond Chandler says, I don't know, because there's so many ways, background things that are happening in the movie that it's up to you to figure out. Not even him to spell out. He doesn't even he doesn't even know. There's different ways you could have played it out in your mind of how this would have worked out for this guy to have been thrown off this bridge.
It's like a game of Clue, but without the answers at the end.
But you get an answer. You know who the good guy is and who the bad guy is and who gets the girl.
Yeah, you get that at the end of it, but it's... I like the idea that there's a lot of stuff within that movie that it's left for you to be like, okay, this person could have done it, or this person could have done it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've seen some mystery movies or noir, like, I would guess mystery movies throughout my lifetime, but I've never seen one like this.
No, me neither. And when you start getting into it, you really get into it.
Like, yeah, you do. And I'm like, oh my God, like, oh my, like, what's going to happen next? Like, I'm so on the edge of my seat. And like I said, unlike, the movies that I'm used to, where they spell it out in the end, or they give you the multitude of endings or how it could have played out or the whodunit, the movie itself lays it out for you from start to finish. You don't need that explanation.
No, not the blatant explanation. It's there, but it makes you work for it in a way.
It'd be like watching Michael Douglas in The Game without having the explanation at the end of it. He just shows up and it's a birthday party, and then you're like, oh, okay.
The Big Sleep has been on the IMDb Top 250 from 1996 up until 2014. I just checked right now. It is currently not on the IMDb Top 250, but would you believe that this film was on the IMDb Top 250 for 19 years?
Yeah.
Do you think this is a movie that deserves that kind of status and recognition?
I do. I believe this does. Because, one, I haven't seen anything like it ever.
No, me neither.
And, I've seen quite a few movies in my lifetime. And to be honest with you, it was a breath of fresh air.
It was new. Even though it was made
I know,
46.
even though it was way before I ever came about, probably way before my parents came about.
Well, it's 1946.
I know, and it kind of was like watching it too. I felt I felt good, I felt relaxed. I felt, like I wasn't subjected to cookie cutter movies.
No, there's nothing cookie cutter about this film. If anything, it set the tone for 100 things.
Oh yeah, and that's probably why. But even then, you would think something would have come along by now that would actually emulate what this movie was trying to do.
No.
I mean, are the I don't want to say this, but are the audiences that slow?
It's a harder sell today.
Are people just wanting to go in and watch something mindlessly rather than try to figure something out? Because that was like half the good part of the movie was that almost interactive that I was thinking while watching it and trying to put this together along with them.
This is the dynamic of elements of what it is we talked about in this conversation, as well as the dynamic of everything that I write about on Metafilmlist and what people tick. It's the dynamic between what people see in the movie theater, what makes money, and what's good, and what ends up being in between of what are people actually watching. So you have the big blockbuster films, you have the very successful good films, and you have the in between where people meet and they watch both of those. But what ends up happening is some of the good films fall on the wayside because they're not big. They don't have Benedict Cumberbatch in it, and they don't have a big name director, and all this. And they're popular now. That's the other big thing, is that they're popular at this moment, whereas in a few years' time, they lose in popularity.
Yeah, no one's going to care.
Yeah. For example, The Wrestler came out in 2008. It got 200,000 reviews in such a short period of time, and everyone was talking about Mickey Rourke and Darren Aronofsky, and, you got to see this movie and so on and so forth. And it held a 8.0 ranking for so long. And in the last few years, it's only gotten a few more votes. I think about 20,000 more votes over the course of the last few years, because the movie has now dropped out of the spotlight, and slowly people are starting to watch it in retrospect and seeing that it's maybe not as good as people thought it was. And it's slowly been dropping in terms of its ranking.
I agree with you on that, because summer's already over and no one's talking about anything that came out anymore.
No.
It's been a month, not even a month, and no one cares. The only thing that I hear people talking about still is Mad Max.
Because Mad Max was
awesome. And I'm fully supporting that, but no one's talking about anything else. I don't hear anybody talking about Jurassic World, and that made the most money this summer.
Nope.
No one's talking about Avengers. No one's talking about anything else that came out. No one's talking about Ant-Man.
That's because there's the movies that make money and there's the movies that are good. So right now there are a handful of films that are that came out this year that have a certain buzz that are supposed to be quite good. Inside Out, which you mentioned earlier, Mad Max Fury Road, Straight Outta Compton has a very good rating floating right now. I watched Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl, which was amazing, and I loved every moment of it, and I think you would too. It's a movie that was released in film festivals and slowly has made the rounds. It doesn't even have a Canadian release date, but it will eventually. So right now it's Sicario and The Martian are the two films that have the big buzz right now. But then again, they just came out. So talk to me in about 6 months' time, what movies are still going to be holding up, and it's not many.
No, not at all.
One day I hope to have a conversation with you about Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl.
It is on Netflix. Yep, it's on Netflix.
Cool. All right. Well, that's homework then.
Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl.
Me, Earl, and the Dying Girl. So let's take a step back away from the film noir stuff for a while, and let's go with a little bit of more modern stuff. But just to sum up, what did you think of Big Sleep as a film, even though it was made in 1946? It was fresh, it was new, but what did you think of the movie? What would you give it out of 10?
Oh, I'd give it a solid 9 out of 10.
I would probably give it a 10 out of 10 because it's just, I look at the movie, was so impressed by it, and I would totally watch it again. And not only that, I could not possibly even begin to suggest what possibly could have been better in the movie.
That's fair. I know I've suggested it to a few people after sitting down and watching it. It is something different. It's something that you don't see a lot of these days. Most crime dramas are either procedural or too focused on action as opposed to solving a mystery.
You don't really get the detective story anymore. The private eye, or just the guy who's trying to figure out, even the cop who's trying to figure out something really complicated and convoluted, and he unravels the mystery of the criminal whatever thing that's happening.
Interesting that you mentioned that. The other thing too is that you don't get anything as complicated as The Big Sleep.
Yeah, that's pretty rare. If it's complicated, it's usually convoluted in such a way like The Matrix is, or films like that trying to put allegory and layers of other stuff in there. Whereas this is just complicated because the situation is complicated in a legitimate, messed up way.
Well, we said earlier that there's some things that you don't have a clear picture of that you as the viewer put together yourself, which makes, as I said previously, it an endearing movie because you don't have that grand explanation at the end of this is how it all happened. No, point A to point B, and it's up to you to figure it out. Would I watch it again? Of course. I look forward to watching more movies like this.
Cool. Well, I think we'll return back to a subject on film noir and Bogart when you finally get a chance to sit down and watch Maltese Falcon.
Yeah.
So thanks for listening. Make sure you check out the Metafilmless website where we post weekly articles, film and soundtrack reviews, and links to our video series Spoiler Alert. We'd love to hear from you, so make sure you drop us some comments there or email us at metafilmless@gmail.com.
To keep up with all our articles, podcasts, videos, and more, you can follow us on Twitter at MetaFilmList or on Facebook. If you're listening to us on Facebook or YouTube, remember to like and comment below. We're also on iTunes and SoundCloud. We recommend downloading the app Podcast Addict to keep up to date, and it will tell you when new podcasts are available.
If you like what you heard, we would love the support. Tell your friends. Tell your dog.
Tell your friend's dog. And remember, we love you.